Hello and welcome back to Cult Leader. I'm your cult leader, Spencer Henry, and I'm back with Children of God Part 2. Except technically by the time we left off in Part 1, they weren't even calling themselves the Children of God anymore. By 1978, they were the Family of Love. Said it before, I'll say it again. We love a rebrand. Surprised that we haven't gotten there yet, but who knows? We're heading into what, year 8 at this point? Maybe a big change coming this year. Probably not, though. For them, it was supposed to be this cleaner, softer version of the group, the cult, the intentional community. But yeah, it didn't end up going that way. It was totally wrong. The rebrand actually didn't help anything. Actually, it made everything worse. Sometimes it happens, right? Rebrands can make things worse. Your favorite star, they try and make a comeback and it's just like, babe, you shouldn't have done it. Or like when a show from your childhood comes back and you're like, oh my God, this is so nostalgic, incredible. But then all these other shows start doing comebacks, right? These reboots. And you're like, you probably just should have left it where it was because now you've run this thing into the ground. But yeah, it didn't help. So it made things so much worse that honestly, it needed its own episode. We have to unpack this all. Quick refresher from where we left off last week. This rebirth basically nuked the leadership structure overnight and rebuilt it from scratch. Chains of command got shuffled around. Whole communities were literally broken up into smaller units, sometimes with zero warning whatsoever. Families were reassigned, split up, and scattered across dozens of countries, usually with no explanation beyond it being quote unquote God's will or some vague end times doomsday type of excuse. And amidst all that chaos, a lot of people started bailing, right? Thousands left the quote unquote Children of God movement entirely. From the outside, it looked like the group was just fading out. Less press, fewer public blowups, kind of their flop era, right? Fewer clashes with law enforcement and former members, fewer headline grabbing scandals. And so people stopped paying attention. Very much out of sight, out of mind. But they weren't gone. They just got quieter, more insular, and way harder to track. Like any good cult leader, David wasn't about to lose control, right? He had to keep a tight grip on his people, his cult followers, and make sure that they kept their eyes on him. This led him to really lean into something that he understood pretty well from his past, and that was media. This wasn't new territory for him whatsoever. If you recall, long before the Children of God even was a thing, David had spent years around radio evangelists, revival preachers, all sorts of Christian broadcasting. And remember, we talked about it last week. In the late 1960s, I believe it was, David traveled around the US helping sell and promote Fred Jordan's Church in the Home TV ministry, which is just, it's wild. It's wild. It's one of those things you see clips and you're like, oh yeah. People loved this. He had seen how effective religious media could be when it basically walked straight into people's living rooms. So he wanted in on this, obviously. He saw the potential here. And his video idea wasn't just about recruiting. It was really more so about controlling the vibe of his followers, reshaping what members thought reality was. Because if he could control what people watched, heard, repeated, and emotionally latched onto, he didn't need to be physically there to control them. It was a way to really start reaching the masses. World domination, here we come. And honestly, it's the same thought process that is held by the leaders of so many social media organizations now, right? It's that same mentality where now they have found their ways into our minds because of our relationships with our phones. I can't go down that rabbit hole right now, but that's just what it reminded me of when I was kind of researching his whole thought process on how he was using media to control his followers. I was like, wow, it's just a really pre-social media example of what social media has become nowadays, right? Where we had something called programmatic advertising, which was the first time that I really learned about what our phones were telling these companies about us, because they could literally track your movement unbeknownst to you. If you had looked up a store or a product on your computer at home, they could catch that from your phone, see if you actually went to that store to buy it. It's crazy. Always opt out of cookies. But anyway, that's not why we're here. We're talking about David. By the early 1980s, portable camcorders were everywhere and VHS tapes were cheap. So David had this realization. He didn't need a studio. He didn't need some big fancy network. He just needed a camcorder, a blank tape, and total control over what his people were consuming. There's actually a clip on davidberg.org that is a perfect example. You see him sitting in front of a fake tropical backdrop, painted palm trees, a beach horizon, rambling about the quote-unquote law of love. And he looks like some old guy handing out end times pamphlets outside of a truck stop. A long, scraggly beard, huge, thick glasses, that aggressively unwashed type. I know. I mean, that cult compound, we know it smelled in there. And he's got that doomsday preacher energy where he sounds deep and meaningful until you slow it down and realize it's just a bunch of bullshit, which is a whole nother tangent that I could go on, especially in relation to social media. There's so many personalities out there who sound so dialed in on how they're presenting you information, like they know it. Like, this is the truth and you need to take my word or else. And that holier than thou preachiness convinces people that they should be taking advice from absolute fucking idiots. Just because someone is well spoken does not mean they are smart. Amen. But yeah, you listen to him and you're like, okay, wow. Okay, he sounds like this. And then you like slow it down and you're like, wait, he's actually making no sense at all. Or he's saying the most simple statements, but they just sound incredible because of the way that he's presenting the information. I'm paraphrasing here, but he goes on about the whole, like the 10 Commandments, saying that they're basically irrelevant, and that Moses was outdated, and that rules from society in his mind were just religious kerfuffle. Jesus, he said, replaced all of that with one real law, the only law, the law of love. Love God, love your neighbor, love everyone, love everything, anyone. And if something was done in love, it couldn't be wrong, so go for it. Your body's your temple, baby. Jesus lives inside you. He's not in the churches. He's not in the buildings. He's not in the structures. Go spread his love. Again, when you look at it like that, it's understandable. You see why people are drawn in. It's that sentiment that we are all love. We are all God's love. On the surface, parts of it can sound warm, spiritual, even a little progressive, right? Especially if you don't know the backstory here. And I love that mentality. God is love. We are God. We're all one. But then you have someone like David who takes that idea and then completely conflates it. And then he starts connecting it to his own sick ideology. He starts taking this concept of all is love. He ties it into spouse swapping, communal sex, flirty fishing. He's like, don't feel guilty. It's all love, baby. And, you know, to a degree, that's fine. But really, this was the go-to excuse he used for everything that came next. Around the same time, family members or followers, cult members, whatever you want to call them, well, their homes all around the world were encouraged and then basically expected to start filming themselves as inspiration for the rest of the intentional community, we'll call them. At first, it looked harmless. People were filming their families, singing songs, doing dances, skits. People put on puppet shows, gave testimonies, bright, smiley, aggressively wholesome stuff. The most outgoing, talented, and conventionally cute kids got pushed front and center in these videos. And David and Karen, still living in hiding, watched these tapes obsessively. Homes mailed them hours and hours of VHS footage every month. Day in the life type montages, birthday parties, nap time, bath time. It was basically a YouTube family channel playlist before YouTube even existed. And it turned into this weird one-man surveillance state run through a VCR. David would watch these videos obsessively, and then he would send out Mo letters, which, if you'll recall from last week, those were the letters, the newsletters that he was sending out to his followers, and it was his only form of communication with the majority of his followers at the time. He was completely out of sight. So he is sending these letters out, and these letters are praising certain families, certain homes, dragging others, and they're putting out new rules or making very deeply unsettling suggestions based on what he'd seen and what he wanted to see more of. And then it went even further off the rails. And I warned you last week, but I'll throw out an additional trigger warning for mentions of child abuse in all realms that you can think of. And as I mentioned last week, everything mentioned in this episode is, of course, alleged. They're still active, so we got to say it. It's alleged. Allegedly. In some of these Mo letters, David decided and declared that if bodies, nudity, and these fuzzy ideas of love were spiritually meaningful, then that applied to children as well. There were no more boundaries. In some of the Mo letters, he claimed that children were naturally sexual, the same way that adults were, and he framed early sexual awareness and exposure as innocent and healthy. Any boundaries, modesty, discomfort, hesitation got brushed off as system lies. Shame wasn't natural, he said. It was something that the outside world forced on people. God never intended it, so why live with it? Like, did you even read the Bible? But once you accept that logic, that there are no boundaries, then yeah, almost anything could be justified, right? Even the worst of the worst. And it was. But honestly, this mindset didn't come out of nowhere. It had been rattling around in David's head for decades. In multiple Mo letters, you can see he wrote openly about his own childhood, where he talked about his nanny doing things to him that there really isn't any neutral way to describe it. It was sexual abuse. He repeatedly described being sexually touched and harassed by his nanny as a young boy. Everything from fondling to sexual contact initiated by his nanny while he was still a child. And in his telling, this wasn't abuse. He was writing about it and reframing it as a loving, natural, and even spiritually meaningful experience. He also wrote about incest and sexualized behavior within his own extended family. In some versions, he claimed sexual exploration with a cousin when he was around 7 years old. To literally anyone else, right? Anyone of sound mind, this reads as trauma stacked on top of trauma, but David never presented it that way. And that's what we have to remember here. He's a cult leader. It's all about how he's presenting the information. He didn't see the experiences as harmful or horrific things that happened to him. He rewrote them as spiritual awakenings, as freeing moments, rather, as proof that love didn't need boundaries and that early sexuality could be holy if it was done in the name of love. And I'm not a psych major, but it's hard not to see what's happening here. David needed his past to make sense, so he turned it into theology, right? If it helped him, it could help others. If he experienced it as love, then love is what it must have been. And if God hadn't stopped it, then God must have approved it, which is my favorite logic that people throw out, right? God gave that kid cancer because it was his journey. Okay, they needed to go on that little journey. But really, this thinking pattern is how David's personal history became everybody else's problem. Thousands of children were raised inside this completely fabricated, deeply unwell doctrine, including his so-called spiritual son, Davidito. We talked about this in the first episode. I say spiritual son because Davidito was not David's biological child. Davidito wasn't even his real name. He was born Ricky Rodriguez on January 25th of 1975 in the Canary Islands to Karen Zerby, also known inside the group as Maria or Mama Maria. I know, a lot of names going on. We mentioned her in the last episode as well because she was David Berg's second wife and his closest collaborator, the high priestess of the cult, if you will. Karen had grown up in evangelical Christianity. She joined the movement early and quickly made herself indispensable. She worked as David's secretary, editor, whatever he needed, basically, transcribing those Mo letters, which I'm going to start my own. The homo letters. It's coming, okay? But anyway, she was helping shape doctrine, managing communications, and enforcing cult policy across the inner circle. By the early 70s, she had climbed straight into leadership, and by the time Ricky was born in the mid-70s, Karen was basically the queen of the family. Ricky was conceived during flirty fishing, the group's sexual recruitment program we talked about in part 1. His biological father was a hotel waiter in the Canary Islands, but David adopted him immediately and gave him a new identity. He became Davidito, Little David. And from that moment, Ricky stopped being treated like an ordinary child. He was treated like something else entirely. He was held up as a prophetic chosen child, the golden boy, the future leader of the family's second generation. He was raised inside of David's extremely secretive inner household, what former members later described as a kind of royal court, with rotating young nannies and constant adult supervision. Within the group, he was famous. He was the ideal child, raised the ideal way. In fact, they were so proud of how they were raising Davidito that his childhood became the basis for one of the most disturbing things the cult ever produced. The story of Davidito, often just referred to as the Davidito book. It was a massive internal publication with more than 700 pages in it. It was written mainly by Karen's assistant, known as Sarah, along with other women who helped raise Ricky, and it was presented as a child-rearing manual, the quote-unquote right way to raise children in the family. A model for parents, a spiritual guide, but it was anything but spiritual. What it actually contained was page after page of very disturbing content, and we're talking explicit written descriptions and photographs of Ricky and other kids being exposed to adult sexual activity beginning in infancy. Like, they would just let children sit in during an orgy, or they'd engage in sexualized play with Davidito that was labeled as educational. I mean, it is horrendous. Davidito wasn't the only one, though. When you zoom out from Davidito or Ricky, other kids in that so-called royal household, like Davida Kelly, Sarah's daughter, Karen's daughter Christina, Ricky's half-sister, and others, they later said they were raised in the exact same way. They were told they were special, chosen, and meant to have this unique spiritual connection with David himself. Adults coerced sexual interactions between the children and framed it as cute or natural exploration. They sent photos of it out to homes in letters. Constant exposure to adult nudity and group sex was presented as this godly educational thing that there was nothing to feel any shame about. It's so disturbing to me that so many people were just like not seeing a problem with this. Everything was recorded. It was circulated internally. And here's the really telling part. Even though the material wasn't treated as shameful, the identities were often hidden. Faces were blurred, painted over, like drawn out, almost like they knew exactly how illegal this all was outside of the cult. It's like, what's going on here? David wrote about it in the Mo letters as if these kids were proof of concept. Proof that children raised without system shame would be freer, happier, more spiritual. From there, he started stripping away basically every boundary that society has around kids and sex. He claimed there was nothing wrong with sex, no matter the age, no matter the relationship, as long as it was done in love, right? Just like when he was a kid with his nanny. It was done in love. Some letters went even further. He explicitly suggested that parents masturbate or perform oral sex on their young sons as a form of bonding, or that they let children stay in bed while parents swapped partners so that the kids could watch and learn love. Come on, include the kids. God will love it. This was called love up time. Questioning it meant you were questioning love and, well, God. Other letters encouraged preteen kids to explore sexually with each other. Teen homes held organized affection nights where physical intimacy was framed as spiritual closeness, and refusing was labeled as selfish or rebellious. Davida and Ricky, who were basically raised as a pre-assigned pair, were constantly together and constantly encouraged to be sexual with each other. It was the complete opposite of what most Christian kids are taught. And while all of this was happening behind the scenes, the family was also pumping out propaganda aimed directly at children. There was something called The Life of Grandpa, an illustrated book series, which was followed by Life with Grandpa puppet videos. And if that name rings a bell, you've probably seen clips floating around online. It's very unsettling. These were internal kids programs that were mailed out to different homes of family members worldwide. Grandpa was this not so subtle stand-in for David, a wise, gentle, unquestionable, always right older man. And then there was Davidito Puppet and other characters. The stories mixed Bible lessons with non-stop obedience programming. Trust and obey. Don't question adults. Submission equals love. And there were so many moments that were wildly inappropriate, even when played off as jokes or harmless silliness. Scenes normalizing nudity, sexualized humor. One infamous segment involved Grandpa fondling a topless robot's breast. Again, these are videos for children. Another clip showed a mother licking her son's wound after a fall because she didn't have anything to clean it with. And then everyone just prayed over it. I don't know. If you've seen clips of it, it's deeply unsettling. Like I said, very, very sinister. There were also the Heaven's Magic and Heaven's Girl comics aimed at older kids and teens, which were glossy, colorful, apocalyptic superhero stories packed with hypersexualization, obedience messaging, and end times propaganda, of course. Spiritual warfare, sexual availability, loyalty to leadership, all front and center in these comics. And then there were the love videos. Remember, this is all pre-smartphones. People were literally hauling VHS camcorders on their shoulders for this. Homes were instructed to film their children, especially preteen girls. Nothing weird about that, right? Dancing. Not really dancing, though. More like striptease routines, posing, moving their bodies suggestively. And parents would take their kids out into the woods and film this stuff for this old fucking weird man who they didn't even get to see. He's a man in hiding. Sometimes they were passed around to the other houses as dance inspiration for their kids. Parents were told this was about freedom, beauty, worship. Sorry, you're a fucking idiot, okay? If you're out filming, if you find yourself with a camcorder in the woods filming your child dancing suggestively so that you can send it to an old man, you're fucking stupid. And that is what it is. Enough. You're fucking stupid. I mean, parents are told, right? Okay, yeah, it's all okay. It's all for the greater good, but it wasn't. It was an entire generation being groomed on camera. It's so fucking gross. When I was researching, I came across a 2020 interview where a family spokesperson was confronted with pages from this material, and they didn't deny it. They didn't act embarrassed. Their response was basically, this is love. And if you don't see that, then you're the one with the problem. Give me a fucking break. They were just like staring straight at evidence that should have triggered immediate law enforcement involvement and calmly explaining why it's pretty holy. It's crazy. You feel like you're living in a fucking clown world, right? Anyway, once a lot of the kids in the cult got older and started trusting their own instincts, asking questions, pushing back on the sexual rules, or just getting labeled rebellious, the group had a solution. They would send them away to places called Victor camps or teen training homes. In reality, these were essentially re-education prisons. These camps were usually set up far from scrutiny in places like the Philippines, Japan, parts of South America, reportedly anywhere with limited oversight and even less chance that an outsider would step in. Kids were cut off from their families and isolated from the outside world. Some camps even had guards. Others didn't even need them. The fear, the brainwashing, the conditioning, that all did the job. It kept kids from even letting themselves think about running. Inside, the discipline was brutal. Prayer marathons that went on for hours, sometimes days. Forced confessions. Public humiliation sessions where kids had to admit sins, real or invented, in front of everyone. Whippings, beatings, even violent exorcisms where they were told that their rebellion was demonic and that questioning leadership meant they were siding with Satan. And all of that ran right alongside the sexual messaging. The usual saying no wasn't treated as a boundary. It was framed as selfishness, pride, and therefore it must be sin. Right? At the same time, the family flooded its communities with end times propaganda because the end is nigh, right? They printed millions of posters showing the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, 666, Christians being tortured, the whole nightmare package. And then in 1983, the Book of the Future became required reading. It spelled out in graphic detail how the end times would unfold and what would happen to members who weren't obedient. Kids even acted out end times scenes on camera, playing persecuted believers, torture victims, martyrers, which is fucking, it's insane. It's all insane to me. The whole thing's fucking crazy. But that constant imagery was the point. It kept people scared, obedient, and trapped in the same paranoid world that the cult had built for them. However, David's grip was soon about to slip because outside pressure was finally starting to catch up. Authorities had noticed the group before. Back in 1974, the New York Attorney General's office actually accused the Children of God of rape, polygamy, incest, child abuse, but nothing major actually came of it. There was no huge developments, no arrests, no real follow through. The group just sort of moved overseas, making it harder to prosecute. But in the 80s, there were raids and investigations in places like Argentina, Brazil, Spain, Australia, and the Philippines, where police seized porn videos, sexualized images of children, internal letters, and cult publications, those Mo letters. But case after case fell apart. Kids were too indoctrinated to testify. Adults used aliases, jurisdictions didn't match up, and police got in the way. Sometimes courts removed hundreds of children for a while and then returned them. Most of the time, authorities left with nothing. And then the AIDS epidemic comes along, and that changes everything. As HIV started to spread, countries started denying visas to family missionaries. This caused more media attention, which caught the eyes of investigators. At this point, flirty fishing, already controversial and under scrutiny, became an even bigger liability for them. And that was one of the biggest ways that they were getting members to that day. So in 1987, David officially ended flirty fishing. And around the same time, the group publicly banned adult child sex. It's like, okay, yeah, great. Everyone stop looking. No longer do you need to film your child dancing for us in a forest. But it was clearly just damage control, right? They didn't change their beliefs. This wasn't accountability. Changing rules on paper didn't remove the abusers. It didn't protect kids that were still inside or undo years of conditioning that taught people not to report abuses. The exposés kept coming. One was actually narrated by a young Helen Mirren, and it was so sad to watch. A family lost their daughter to lupus because the teachings of the group forbade traditional medical attention. So she passed away right there in one of these homes that was operated by family members. Her real family was devastated, but did David or leadership reach out with condolences? No. David did write a Mo letter detailing how he had seen her in his dreams and they had sex and climaxed over and over again in heaven. So she was okay. Don't worry about mourning her. Even after the family's reputation took a hit, the movement survived. David Berg, however, didn't. He died in October of 1994. Good riddance, sicko. And after that, Karen Zerbe, Mama Maria, later Maria Fontaine, became the main leader. Like David, she stayed hidden, but under her control, the rules got tighter, not looser. And the investigations got deeper. In 1995, the British High Court stepped in. Judge Alan Ward reviewed thousands of pages of evidence, including the story of Davidito, and said the group had a pattern of sexual and physical abuse of minors. He also condemned the group's teachings and corporal punishment. But the result wasn't what many survivors wanted. Kids could stay with the group only if the family officially rejected David's sexual teachings going forward. Corporal punishment was banned, and some basic safety rules were required. This led to the Love Charter, which the family presented as their official reform. In practice, it also worked as a legal cover. It was a way to claim we've changed without fully taking apart what caused the harm, like when they went from children of God to the family of love. This was just version 3.0. And then they rebranded again to the Family International. Then came a PR push. Some homes were open to journalists. The group used it to highlight their charity work, disaster relief efforts, music groups, and smiling teen choirs. Meanwhile, Karen was still nowhere to be seen. Adult-child sexual contact was now officially grounds for excommunication. On paper. But survivors say that abuse didn't just stop. It just got pushed under the rug and more well hidden. New teachings now included loving Jesus, a sexualized form of devotion, spirit helpers, angels, mythical figures, even dead celebrities, and keys of the kingdom, which were special powers tied to obedience. And then in the 2000s, something finally changed. Kids who were born into the cult grew up, and they left. Thank God. Good for them. Many left with no money, little education, no support system. Some became homeless just to get out of those homes. Many reported suffering from deep depression, PTSD, suicidal thoughts. Some didn't survive. Speaking out didn't take the family down, but the silence around it finally started to break. By the time Ricky, Davidito, got older, the chosen child label didn't lead to a lucky life. It led to a long, slow disillusionment and a lot of realizations. Around the year 2000, he'd been through enough. He left the family and moved to the US, trying to do what a lot of second-gen kids dream about: live like a normal person. He wanted a normal name, a normal job, a normal home, anything that didn't reflect David Berg's worldview and teachings. He met and married a woman. I believe her name was Alicia Munyamel. There's different names in different sources, and for a moment in time, it looked like the break from the group might stick. but there's no way what he grew up with could stay behind him that easily. People who knew him later described a bad spiral into rage, dissociation, hopelessness, and the kind of fallout that lines up with that kind of deep trauma that could be a ticking time bomb if you didn't receive the right help. What happened to him isolated him from people. It wasn't the sort of childhood you could explain to anyone outside of the family or other similar cults without sounding unreal. And who do you really trust? He drifted towards the only people who truly understood, other survivors. He found ex-members through online survivor spaces like movingon.org, where people compared memories and tried to make sense of what they'd been taught to call love. Ricky posted his own stories there too, fittingly titled Life with Grandpa, and it wasn't vague or sentimental, it was detailed. It was blunt about what happened in David's household. He laid out what he saw as atrocities done against them, and he became convinced nobody was ever going to face any real consequences for their actions. That's where things took a scary shift. It stopped being about surviving and living a normal life and started becoming about settling the score. I mean, you can't really blame him. He wasn't just angry for himself, he was angry for his sisters, for the other kids he believed had been abused across family homes. And he fixated on one person in particular, his mother, Karen Zerby. She stayed hidden and protected by secrecy and loyal insiders, even from her children. But Ricky tried to find her anyways. He chased rumors, followed leads, moved around based on whispers of where she might surface next, always just missing her. On January 7th of 2005, he recorded a video manifesto. This time it wasn't just his usual venting, it was a plan. He described his abuse, he named leadership figures, and had a whole story about revenge being the only path left to justice. It sounded like someone who felt trapped and decided the only way out was to blow everything up as closure. And then he went straight for one name, Angela Smith. She was called Sue in family materials about Davidito. She was one of his former nannies and was connected to the Davidito story. Ricky contacted her. He invited her to dinner in Tucson, saying he just wanted to meet up because he needed closure. Like he just wanted answers. Like it could be contained. A human conversation, and that they both could just move on afterwards. However, that's not what happened. On January 8th of 2005, he brought her back to his Tucson apartment, and that's where he attacked and killed her. She was later found lying on the carpet with her throat cut and defensive wounds on both of her arms. After that, he left Arizona. He got in his car and called up his estranged wife, Alicia, to confess and tell her what he had done. He said it was out of revenge, out of justice. He drove west, crossing into California. On January 9th, near Blythe, California, he stopped in a remote area and made one more phone call to Alicia, and then he shot himself, ending his life. He left behind a video and written notes explaining what he'd been living with, and the only justice he could imagine was the kind he could carry out himself, because he didn't believe the people who hurt children in the world would ever face consequences any other way. The family's public response was the same as always. Karen Zerby stayed hidden and refused interviews. A spokesperson denied Ricky had been abused and said he was just mentally unstable. They blamed apostates, their word for ex-members who speak out. The message was basically, this was just a disturbed man, not something that the group caused. We're not responsible for this. Former members pushed back, though. They shared firsthand accounts of widespread sexual abuse involving children. They pointed to the group's own publications, especially, the story of Davidito and David Berg's gross sexual teachings. I mean, these are physical things that exist. This isn't just a few bad apples in the group. Survivors talked about second generation deaths like suicides and overdoses, like, hey, this actually really fucked us up. The case pulled the group's buried history back into the open in a way it hadn't faced since the early 90s. After 2005, the movement looked like it was shrinking. A lot of the communities closed down, homes dissolved, and more people became fellow members, still connected but living outside the commune structure. The group didn't vanish entirely, but the old, tightly controlled communal system became harder to sustain under the media scrutiny. From 2006 onwards, the Family International was basically in survival mode. Karen Zerby and her husband Peter Amsterdam, aka King Peter, were fully in control of the group, but almost entirely out of sight. Karen stayed hidden, rarely seen, communicating through internal writings and approved channels, while Peter became the operational face of the group, issuing directives, handling administration, and keeping the organization moving as usual. In 2010, Karen and Peter announced what they called the reboot. They dismantled most of the communal living structure, they shut down homes, and pushed members to live independently. It was framed as spiritual renewal, but it was a bit of a shutdown. At the same time, older literature was pulled from shelves, restricted, or quietly buried away, and the group began drawing a hard line between then and now. The Family International slowly faded out of physical space and into the internet. They operate under many different fronts. No more big visible communes, no more mass street witnessing. Instead, just websites, digital publications, and private online networks. Karen continued issuing spiritual material from behind the curtain, and Peter continued acting as the gatekeeper and deciding what stayed, what disappeared, and how the group described itself to the outside world. Membership continued to quietly drop. People aged out. Others just distanced themselves without saying much. Today, the Family International publicly describes itself as a small online Christian network spread across dozens of countries. So it's still going. It's been a while since we've talked about a group like the Family International, Children of God, Family of Love, whatever you want to call them. And it kind of brings me back to the root of this all, the root of this show. The fact that they still exist in some capacity to this day means that it's something that needs to be talked about. All we can do is send love and strength to all of the survivors that are out there who did endure abuse in groups like the Family International and so many of the other similar ones, and hope that they find some peace. So that's where we're leaving it for the week. I will see you next time. And until next time, if you think your family's dysfunctional, well, you ought to hear about the family. Okay? Goodbye.